Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello. Oh, wasn't sure if people are attending
Why not?
because it's just the two of us, I think.
No, we have Boon Chang, we have Queen, and we have Kevin. We are five.
Oh, okay. So sorry, I don't. I'm on my cell phone. I have COVID. 2 days of staying home.
Oh, I hope you get better.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Did you got the COVID medication? I heard the new pills are so good.
No, maybe I should check if it got better just with, you know, painkiller.
Okay, let's wait 2 more minutes. If nobody joined, then we can continue our discussion about latency and bit error rate.
Recording in progress.
You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, let's start because our meeting is short. We don't want to spend so much time. I think we got stuck at line number 40, which somehow we have to measure bit error rate and latency with the presence of basically no FEC, with FEC, CRC, retry. I believe this is some kind of discussion that we ended up here. Let me just see if I can paste the figure here. And going after it and basically hear you guys' feedback. Okay, apparently I cannot do that. Let me just share the other screen and then we can chat about it. Okay. This is, I think, the discussion that we had last time. I think, Kevin, you were not on the call. We're going to have different levels of latency with respect to the bit error rate. What we were thinking actually to have 2 levels at least, plus 1 level of the retry. There basically bit error rate and latency is where we received 1 gigabit per second data from the core logic. And we pass it through serializer if we do or if not, and then TX, RX receiver, and deserializer, where again we pass 1 gigabit per second data to async. That's the first basically numbers that we're going to capture, and we call that maybe latency, raw bit error rate, something like that. We can define the name later. And then if we do have a FIC or CRC on top of it, how much latency we're going to get after this forward error correction or CRC, how much is going to be the new latency, and how much improvement we're going to get over bit error rate, or what is the targeted of bit error rate for that. And then on top of this too, we have a retry, which the latency, I believe it's so hard to define because you have to repeat and repeat to the point you get the data that you want. But at least we can have some numbers with the representation of the bit error rate. So, okay, the targeted bit error rate with the retry is like that. Again, I'm not that much expert on the retry. I rely on you, Kevin, Quinn, Majid, and others who are on the call to correct me if I'm wrong about the understanding of a retry. Is it easy? Maybe I should ask Majid because he was helping last week. Is it easy to associate a latency number to it?
Statistically, yes. I think, you're in the right direction here. What we mean, I think what is meant here by FEC CRC is just error handling. Any method of error handling. And of course, there are these three that we are looking at. Statistically, it's possible that retry, basically in PCIe, the way they talk about it is they're saying if you have pre-FEC 10 to the -6 first bit error rate in terms of birth, then it's better to have retry. So I think it's good to sort of follow on your thoughts here. It's good, just all the error handlings, and I think it's good
to and decoder, and then define coder and decoder with the respect to the error correction.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, at least in PCIe they talk about error handling, but yeah, I think, but to be more easy for people to understand what you had, FEC, CRC, and whatever method is part of the solution, because I think I wasn't sure I agree with Bapi, who said, why do we even include it? And my thinking is, if a solution includes these things, you cannot exclude this measure. And I was thinking about the 200 gig and other Ethernet solutions that more and more they have to deal with it. So not sure. Coder is not easy to, coder can mean many things. Maybe you could read either error handling, at least on what I would say, or
but error handling at the receiver and the transmitter, they're supposed to be two different things.
Right. Is it error coding at the transmit side and
Yeah.
error handling at the receive side? Something like that?
Or error decoding.
So
but it's not only error detection, it's correcting also. Some of the, for example, Reed Solomon code, you can correct it too.
yeah, that's why I think
that's
error handling. It's more than just coding, decoding. It's error handling.
Okay.
So I mean, the two with effect, you can do correction, detection and correction. With CRC, you do retry. You just you determine that there's a problem, and you tell it to retry.
Then should we go back to the old fashioned that what I had, basically FIC instead of error coding and error handling?
Yeah, maybe it's better. So you could just write FEC, CRC, retry. I think we just list them. At least I don't know any other method.
And the retry is something that happens out of the scope of this latency.
It's out of, I don't know.
It's one
No,
level
it's
up.
not. No, latency does. I mean, you're right that it's it's a it's a scheme of its own by its own, but at the same time, it falls in the same category. For example, PCIe or CXL even, they rely on it. So
Yeah, I
hence,
know, but in terms of showing latency associated with the retry, I think it's difficult to define it because you don't know how many times you want to try it, or how many times you want to retry it to get to the error that you want.
well, as I said, in PCIe, because of this philosophy of error handling, which is summarized in by saying we are better off retry than strong FEC, a strong CRC and strong light FEC, and we're better off. So so that means that's part of the scheme. And I think because it's something by its own, maybe we would not be able to in a white paper capture it. We may have to put it as a footnote. But in PCIe studies and papers published, there is there are indications of expected latency and because of this approach, they force it to be less than 10 to the minus 6 prefect error. Otherwise, that's
I
not.
understand that part, Majid, but the latency that is going to get added because of the retry is basically another latency of the whole link. Again, another latency of the green. Let's call the first T1.
At least, yes.
At least
Yes.
one T1.
Yes.
And let's call
Correct.
this T0 latency. My point is that the time associated to retry is statistical. It's not the absolute value like FEC and other methods. If I have a read Solomon, there is a specific fixed delay associated with it. Then I can say, hey, if your serializer to deserializer bit error rate is 10 to the power of minus 6, and if you, for example, add 20 nanosecond of read Solomon 255 or whatever code it is, you can get it to 10 to the power of minus 15 guarantee with the 20 nanosecond delay. That's totally defined and people can report it. But for retry, I don't have any timing or latency or throughput number because it really depends on the channel and how many times we have to retry. If the channel is a little bit worse, then we might actually retry more. The challenge that we have right now is how we can define a good parameters when we do have a retry and we ask people to measure. One that I have on top of my head, we just say, hey, we do have a retry, yes and no. And the minimum requirement for retry is that much bit error rate. With the retry, you're going to get to that much bit error rate.
I think that's a good way to escape the problem, the sort of unsolvable issue.
The yes and no and targeted bit error rate, something like that.
But you do need to make sure that the CRC is in the latency.
Yeah, I think to me, CRC and retry go together. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, you have the latency of the CRC, both the encoding and decoding. But by itself, it doesn't give you any improvement in bit error rate unless you do a retry, because CRC is just determining that you have an error. It's the retry that helps improve it.
I think the delay of the CRC, because it's a very light logic, is negligible in terms of basically the entire latency of T1 that retry is supposed to do.
I didn't understand that. You're saying T1's a lot less than
T1 is much larger than CRC time. And if your CRC is okay, if not okay, basically flags there is an error, then you have to go through T1. Basically for retry, let's put it the latent. If you want to define latency T3, then we have to try it n number of times T1 plus CRC. My point is, even N is 1, T1 is much larger than CRC time. Maybe I'm wrong.
The CRC time is in T1. It's in the coding and uncoding, right? Decoding. You changed it to just say FAC now, but it was FAC plus CRC is that blue box, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should I put
I think it's
CRC?
better to put fake CRC because then it's better if we keep it as it was before.
Okay. But do we have a CRC at the transmitter or is only at the receiver?
It's at both sides. You do the encoding and you do the checking.
Okay. And if one protocol doesn't have a retry, they just simply ignore the CRC delay that they have.
I don't know. I don't think doing a CRC without a retry makes any sense.
Exactly.
But
Right.
you only do the retry if you have an error. So most of the time you have the very low latency, a low T1, and occasionally you'll have to loop back.
Didn't you guys think this explanation with the value that we are measuring, but just saying yes and no, and what's the targeted bit error rate with the retry is enough information?
Yes, I think it's good enough because especially that in the case of uh, uh, die to die, I think these are a little less relevant. I guess in UCIe, when they combine it with PCIe, then that's different. But generally, I think it's a good approach.
And this 1 gigabit per second is good. Should we stick with it, or do you guys prefer
I'm
different?
not, I mean, that's a, why are you choosing that number?
That's basically usually the core logic speed. That's where you hand off your data to ASIC. We have to pick one number because that if you hand off at 10 gig, then the entire latency of your serializer, deserializer is much less than someone who is handing it off at 500.
Okay, well, I guess if you look at, I mean, UCIe is a fixed serializer of 8. So it is handing off at 2 gig when it's 16 gigabits per second. So you're going to define latency at 1 gigabit. That means you're going to define the line rate as 8 gigabits per second. It's not some maximum line rate. It's some fixed lower line rate in order to lower the ASIC clock.
I'm okay if we want to say 2 gigabit per second. But I really like to have a fixed number here. Otherwise, latency measurement doesn't have real meaning.
I don't understand that statement.
Which statement?
Why you're saying the latency?
Because one of the major contribution of the latency T0 is how many level of the serialization you're doing and how many level of the deserialization you're doing.
I agree, of course, but I don't know if you look at what's a good example, a DDR5 or an HBM5, they run with a 4-to-1 serializer, but they're running pretty slow. And if you look at a 32 gig SerDes that's running, it has a lot 16-to-1 serializer. It has a lot more clock cycles, but they're a lot faster clocks. The total net time is about the same.
No.
Sorry, Majid, at least I don't know how I don't know French.
Sorry about that. I was interrupted here.
That's okay. I think we had this discussion also last time, Kevin. And Quinn.
I'm just saying, if we do this, it'll make higher speed SerDes will have a higher latency when they're run at lower rates. I mean, because they have a higher serialization.
Let's pick one example. Let's talk about long reach SerDes or XSR standard. They are at 112 gig, and soon they're going to be at 224.
Yeah.
But their interface to ASIC is either 1 gig, 500 meg, or 2 gig.
Yep.
And the level that I have to basically do the serialization from, let's say, 1 gig to 112 is going to be 56 times because it's PAM4. And I have to convert it to PAM4.
Mm-hmm.
But if I do it from the 2 gig, then I have 28 level.
Agreed.
But I think this is too much detail. Then in benchmarking, it may get lost.
It may not. Otherwise, the latency number that you're reporting is not going to be, again, accurate. The whole point of this that we are telling people how to measure it. When you want to measure latency, then somehow I'm going to do a cheating and not basically including
I understand.
my serializer time, which is the actually major contribution of the latency.
I think this is, I agree with your sort of larger point, but I guess I would say the latency should be reported at a bandwidth, not that the bandwidth should be fixed.
At the bandwidth.
Right.
And there may be the same interface might have different latencies at different bandwidth configurations.
It definitely will. I agree.
But you don't want to fix the bandwidth. You want to say you need to report them together. At this bandwidth, this is the latency. If you want to report multiple, that'd be fine. But you should report it shouldn't be 1 gigabit per second. It should be at bandwidth.
Right. And a good example.
I totally disagree with you guys. Again, I'm gonna go to the extreme case. I'm gonna go to 112 gig PAM4, and then I say, hey, my bandwidth is 112 gig. This is a real number to report. I say, okay, beginning of my serializer is 112 gig PAM4, and I just report TX, and I just report. Everybody is gonna say, okay, we are less than 1 nanosecond.
I think I missed the point. You're saying they would say there's no serializer, so it's just 112 to 112.
If we don't fix that 1 gig to report the low number, then why should I include my serializer delay?
Right. Well, just to give another example, in PCIe, the latency changes if you are by 2 versus by 16. That is related to what we're talking about here too. And in a way, one should report both. But I think you're talking about yet another thing. For example, in Ethernet, where you have the 4 times 25 gig, that's bandwidth versus gigabit per second, which maybe it's again another thing.
My point is, this is 2 ASIC core, and they have a basically whatever bus that they have. It's at the very, very low rate bit per second, but in the parallel. And we start actually adding a die to die phi here. And one of the job of this die to die phi, no matter how we say that this is parallel or serial, is somehow doing a serialization from the defined speed of this ASIC core. And I don't believe people go more than 2 gig, at the most 1 gig, maybe majority at 500 still, because they have the 2 PNR. when they do place and route on the AC core, the speed that they can feed out of the AC core is around 1 gig or 2 gig the most right now. And that's the responsibility of the PHY.
We're all agreeing on that.
Okay.
It shouldn't be 112 gig.
Exactly. And then if it is 1 or 2 gig, it's really important. This is the PHY that I'm implementing, how many level of the serialization needs to do.
Yep, again, totally agree. So I think the latency is going to be a fixed number of clocks, and so in nanoseconds it's going to be dependent on the line rate. So if you're running at 16 gig with a 1 gig ASIC clock, and then you run a 32 gig with a 2 gig ASIC clock, the serialization delay will actually be lower in nanoseconds. So reporting the line rate and reporting the internal clock makes sense. Saying that the internal clock has to be 1 gig was the part that Quinn and I both said, well, I'm not sure I agree that it has to be a specific number, because it's whatever your serialization ratio is versus the line rate. But it can't be 112 gig. I totally agree with you on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree, but we have to fix it, or we have to ask people to report it.
Yeah, and
I
was thinking it was more reported. The other thing that I just want to mention that you're not talking about here, there's no clock domain crossings going on. So the latency that Elad always talks about that doesn't get reported is usually your serializer is synced to the ASIC clock, but your deserializer can't be because it's a different chip. So there has to be clock domain crossings somewhere.
Yeah, if it's not clock forwarding, I agree. Then we
no, even if it is clock forwarded, the logic running on the ASIC on the right is running on some clock domain of its internal core. Your dotted iFi has to cross a clock domain somewhere.
I agree. Then that's where we need the elastic buffer.
We need an elastic buffer and we need to show, is it typically it's between the deserializer and the FAC, and the FAC's running off the logic clock, or maybe it's after the fact, but something it's a half a clock cycle usually. It's not a lot, but I mean it's something that people need to think about, because the two ASIC cores, they might have the same rough clock, but there's no clock alignment
exactly
between them.
Yeah, I agree that we didn't include the elastic buffer here.
Yeah, so I would think about where that should go. I'm okay with saying we have to specify the ASIC clock and the ratio to the line rate. If we specify at 1 gig, then some PHYs are going to have to artificially run slow on the line rate. And so the latency will not be, the latency they would normally report. So it's something to think about.
Right, I agree with that.
Then we have to be somehow uniform. The whole point of this activity.
Or reporting it. Is it possible to put it as a parameter?
That's the question. Which one is better? Should we say that everybody has to be normalized to 1 gig, or should we say, okay, you report what the input?
You could always put in line items for both. You could say 1 gig ASIC clock, what is your line rate? And then at your maximum line rate, what's your ASIC clock? Those are both possible. Those are two scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Two different latency numbers, at least in my case, and most UCIe PHYs and BO PHYs, they would be, you get two different latency numbers. If the serializer is fixed and you're changing the line rate, and it's a fixed number of clocks at a different line rate, you're gonna get a different number in, nanoseconds. It's all sub-nanosecond range, but I don't know if that's overcomplicating it, but that's one way to do it.
Okay, then I will keep these two items as an open. Anyway, we have to put the elastic buffer and we are running out of time. If you don't mind, think about these two issues that we have. Where should we put the elastic buffer and how we should reflect it in our latency measurement. And the second one is we have two options. Either ask people to report this this number. Another one is to just fix it at 1 gig. Again, remember, if we ask them to report, then the whole question of the, okay, who is gonna implement the FIC on that speed is another.
Yeah. If people report 112, then it's meaningless. So I'm agreeing with you on that. I'm scratching my head a little bit. I want to think about it more. I think that reporting T0 and T1 will be helpful because I think we all know that the UCIe spec reports a quote T1 number, but it doesn't really have any CRC or FAC. So it's really the T0 number, and it frustrates ELOD immensely. So, I think separating them and defining this way will help.
Yeah, if people look at the T0 and T1, it's equal, then they understand there is no FIC.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Except they say there is CRC, and yet there's no time for it. So it's inconsistent in the way the spec is written, to say the least. But this would help. This helps clarify the numbering, the nomenclature and the definitions. So I like it.
Okay, then I put this one in one of the tab, maybe the tab 3. Right now we have 2 tabs. One is drawing, one is the spec. I will update this. I yellow this thing because we need to come back and do more discussion. This is, by the way, last item that we have.
Apologize. I need to drop.
Sure, and then we can come back next week to continue, and hopefully people have better idea to tackle this 2 yellow ones.
Yeah, and maybe if we can resend this link, you can copy Elad and Poppy and gather their inputs by email, even if not they didn't meeting.
I will do.
Cool. Thanks, Shab.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Majid.
All right. Bye.